Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Age of Influence series. We have an exciting lineup today talking about throwing the right punch with influencer marketing. We have Devin Widgesinger here with Insight Pool, and we have Shonda, who is the social and digital guru. She ran digital over at UFC and now is a consultant herself, and she's excited to talk with us today. So before we get too in-depth in the webinar, I'd love for Devin, who is the CEO at Insight Pool, to kind of kick it off, share a little bit about yourself, and then we'd love to hear from Shonda.
Yeah, no, thanks, Hillary. Appreciate it. This is a particular fun one for me because I'm a big UFC fan. And, the interesting part is that as we've done some work with Shonda in the past and seen the evolution of how social has become a pretty incredible driver of eyeballs and results for things that, had previously had a, large following, but maybe a niche following in the beginning of its days, like UFC, but have risen to international prominence, and in no small part to efforts that Shonda and her team has done in the past. So, Shonda, needs no introduction really, but I'd love to kick it off to you and have you tell us a little bit about your career and what you did at UFC, and then what you're looking forward to doing next, and then we'll go ahead and start sharing with the audience.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys so much for having me. I appreciate it, and excited to be here. As you said, I was formerly the director of social media and digital for Ultimate Fighting Championship for the last 3.5 years. I was with the company for 6.5 years, and the last 3.5, I really got an opportunity to experiment quite a bit and see what we can do things differently to increase the engagement with our fan base and really start tapping into our influencers, both celebrity influencers, digital and social influencers, and then just our normal average Joe guys that are our fan base, and tapping into all those different audiences. So it was a really, really fun journey. And in the last month and a half, I've been doing some consulting work and kind of going to see where this next journey takes me.
Cool. Well, thanks. It'll be fun to obviously get some of the lessons learned from you, and I think we'll be able to dive right into that. So we're going to go ahead and just talk. In the beginning, everybody talks about audience segmentation. Some brands get to talk about fan segmentation, but this is not a new word or necessarily a new concept, but it is somewhat new as we think about social media, where social has largely been about simply broadcasting and simply talking generally to the masses and being lumped into one category. But Shonda, you guys at UFC did a great job of making it a lot more custom. So I'd love for us to walk into the next slide and have you talk through how you guys customize that to fit each of your tailored audiences.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things that I had noticed was everything was kind of this one size fits all strategy. The type of promo spots that we were talking, that we were using to talk to a customer that was going to come to a live event versus watching something on television. Those are two different experiences. So really try to get into a mindset of figuring out who our audience was and understanding that what part of the life cycle of their fandom and with UFC and kind of where that stood, where they were at there. So really, it was really interesting to kind of start bucketing fans into these different, or putting them into these different buckets and then learning from them exactly where they were at and learning how to create content around that and then start shifting them down, from casuals to fringe, or from fringe to casuals to hardcore and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and I think you just hit on this, is that how people walk through a funnel nowadays. We used to obviously all think about it as a sales funnel, but I think we live in this day and age where people love to buy, but hate to be sold, if you will. And working with influencers are ones that kind of help carry that message. So I was curious, when you talk about like casual to engaged, and then beyond that, what did that mean to you all when somebody was casual and then when they were engaged? Could you add a little clarity for the audience to what that meant to you?
Definitely. Actually, if we jump to slide 6, we can actually break those down. So what we had was we identified as fringe, casual, and hardcore. Our fringe, what I call our fringe fans, is these are the people that like to come around during events because that's where all their friends are going to be. Everybody's going to be hanging out at a sports bar, or they're going to be, there's a big, somebody's hosting a pay-per-view night at their house. So I'm coming over because that's where all my friends are at. I just want to be a part of the action, and there's free food and beer, right? That's why the fringe fans are there. And then the casual fans, they kind of come and go when there's big names that they recognize. The Ronda Rouseys, the Conor McGregors, things like that. But they might not necessarily know, some of the other names on the roster. Again, these are all top tier talent, but they just are kind of paying attention to the big names. And one of the examples that I can give that's even non-UFC, people who aren't boxing fans, when Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather, that was a fight that's been, years and years and years in the making. And people felt like, well, I don't really watch boxing, but this has been such a talked about event. I kind of want to make sure that I'm staying in tune with what's happening. And then you've got your hardcore fans, and they're going to watch every event, every weekend. Doesn't matter who's on the card. These guys know everything from the stats and the records and, the history of where this fighter's come from and where he's gone to from different organizations and different titles that they've held, different weight classes that they've moved to. So the hardcore fans know everything about everything.
That makes sense. And, how did you get them to move through the funnel from fringe to casual and casual to hardcore? Or was it, hey, you just knew how to talk to each of those different groups? Or did you create a strategy that said, hey, let's get more people, to be hardcore fans of ours? And could you talk about that?
Sure. There's definitely ways of creating content around those different groups. So, if we were pushing a lot of content that was showcasing stats and metrics, around somebody's their time during UFC, a fringe fan might not really know or understand or care, but they might be more interested in things that we were able to connect to from a pop culture perspective. If Tyrone Woodley, for example, was in the movie Straight Outta Compton, making that kind of a connection, because that might be more where that fan is at. And then there's a little bit of an interest of saying, oh man, this fighter was in that movie. I liked that movie. And now there might be a little bit of a connection between that fan and that athlete that's outside of the octagon, but it gives that person enough of an interest to follow that athlete in or outside of the octagon. And so that's where we were trying to figure out how to basically put our hooks into it from different aspects, whether it be music, movies, entertainment, just other things that athlete might be doing, and moving people along the path from there.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And even in our time, in working together, we've been able to just see the results that, whether they come through audience specific mentions or discussions and so forth, that it's real. Engagement drives event sales and turnouts. I can tell you that one of our investors too is the president of the Atlanta Hawks, and he talks about the story of the turnaround of the Hawks was simply due to digital, and digital and social now became a C-suite discussion. And there was a funny thing that he even did where he took Tinder and matched people that were in the actual stadium that came to a game, and there was a Tinder room where the guys had to give the girl a rose, and it was connecting the digital world to the online and real world, and digital drove attendance and drove real seats and drove real mentions and obviously drove real ticket sales. So I was wondering if that's a C-suite discussion you guys had.
Absolutely. Our C-suite level was very, very interested in what we were doing through social and how we were moving the needle and doing things a little bit differently. One of the things that we had done was, again, going back to the example of using the same type of spot to promote ticket sales versus watching it live at home. Those are two very different experiences that you're telling somebody to have. So we had an event or a promotion where we had invited several pretty hardcore fans of UFC Fight Pass. It's basically our subscription platform, similar to like what Netflix would be, a subscription base for all of the fight content. So there was a promotion where we had several of the fans come out to Las Vegas, and they got to have meet and greets with fighters. They got to be part of a fan symposium, kind of giving their feedback about the platform. And there was all this B-roll footage that we were able to collect from that whole week, and follow them around from all the stuff that they did in Las Vegas to actually following them to their seats where they were sitting to watch the fight. And then we ended up using that content as our paid social strategy to promote tickets on sale, because that was truly an experience in arena versus the TV spot that we used to sell a pay-per-view and what that viewing experience would be like at home. So that actually ended up, it fit better for the audience who we were intending for it to hit and reach, and really kind of showcasing what that experience was going to be like live in person.
Yeah, no kidding. I think some of that was even described here as the true thing, and I know we'll get to this a little bit later, is people want to feel like they really are backstage, right? Like they want to feel like it's authentic. And I know we'll get to that in a second, but the effect of, instead of it being a commercial but being broadcasted by others that are there, had to have the effect that all of us want. That's actually different than what traditional marketers have had to think through, right? It used to be very ad agency, very professional, very planned, not knowing how to react off the cuff and so forth. So how did you guys mechanize so much of that new philosophy internally? Was it, hey, you had to show the results and then more and more, because the having control of one's message in somebody else's hands can be a scary thing. So I was just curious how you were able to get your executive team to be able to do that, and then not even just do that, but then to embrace it.
Yeah, some of it, honestly, some of it was gut feel, but then you had to use the numbers to back up what you were basically, to defend a decision, basically. So I would go through and I would look at, I was very, very involved in the numbers of everything that we did. So I'd look at the metrics to see what was working, what was moving the needle. And then if I had a gut feel, because I was listening to our fan base and saying, I think if we create something along this line, or working with our production team to put a little bit of a different spin on things, test it, and then immediately start monitoring and making sure that it's going in the direction that I was intending it to. But a lot of times I'm surprised at how often when I speak with people, how much they're actually not paying attention to that, and really just using the numbers as an internal compass of saying you're going the right direction or not. And sometimes there could be several different compasses that are going to give you different directions for different things. What might have worked for ticket sales might not have worked for selling merchandise, but you have to be able to put things into different buckets and start paying attention to how your audience is engaging with things, and continuing to evolve around that.
Well, and you mentioned this, and this approach of one size does not fit all, and there's obviously audiences that maybe in some of your buckets are in all of these different social networks, or just in one of them, or certain groups, and trying to balance all that. Maybe back in the day, TV was the most expensive, and certainly still is, but at least you thought everybody was looking at it. Nowadays,
Right.
You're kind of like in this business casual world on Twitter, and then you're in a very specific casual promotional world on Snapchat, but it goes away, and then Instagram, and then Facebook has the entirety of the audience. But how did you manage that, and what are some of the things that you guys did differently per channel to then weave them all together, though, so it's still a single brand story?
Sure. As more social media channels start to pop up and evolve, you're sitting here thinking, oh my God, now what are we going to do for this channel that's unique from the other channels? And a lot of that was test and trial for us. Facebook obviously had the biggest audience. It was over 22 million, I think it was, fans on that platform. Video obviously being heavily used and with the Facebook algorithms, that's really the direction that Facebook is trying to move into, both, just uploading video and also live video. Snapchat was interesting because it's a much younger demo, and I felt like Snapchat was a place where it didn't need to be so brand, hardcore to the, sticking within, the four walls of this is how the brand looks and feels, but it actually gave us an opportunity to let our athletes showcase their personality, their humor, make it a little bit more fun. So we did some fun stuff in Snapchat where I had actually seen one of our athletes was doing some stuff on his personal account when he was cooking, and I reached out to him and I said, hey, let's do a weekly segment called Cooking with the Menace. And that became a thing where we created content around specific holidays. So if it was Cinco de Mayo, he was making guacamole, and if it was, the 4th of July, he was hosting a barbecue at his house, and he started bringing in other influencers into his content, both, YouTube influencers or e-gamers and things like that. Instagram was more of a place for us to do a visual storytelling leading up to an event. So, all the behind the scenes stuff, the emotions that an athlete goes through during fight week, from the weight cut to the locker room, to the walkout, and then the, excitement of winning or losing, at the end of the night. So that gave us a place to kind of really do that visual storytelling. And then Twitter was more of our live play-by-play engagement space. That's where we were getting a lot of, just conversations started back and forth with our publishing live highlight content. We would syndicate some of that content across to other platforms, but that was really the place where people were having that live conversation with us.
Yeah. No, I think, like you said, each one has its place and is unique. And sometimes those transfer one to another, but for the most part, it's again, still somewhat segmented. And, one of the things, too, that I think is interesting to point out as we're talking about influence is the segmentation of influencers as well, right? So you mentioned some of the fighters, then obviously some of the fans, and then, people that engage from the fighters and fans. And, we've seen where many people, when they think of influencer marketing, or they're trying to get their first, toe in the pool, if you will, that influencer marketing is all about, hey, let me try and get the biggest names to say something for me and watch what happens. And the truth is that what we've seen occur is that if you're gonna approach influencer marketing like that, it's almost like advertising, right? If you're gonna pay somebody to say something for you and then they do so, it creates a similar flash in the pan. But the reality is that the longevity of those followers and people that engage is pretty limited. And as we explain to a lot of our folks that are just trying to get educated on the space, there's all these hyper influencers that we all know, right? We all know and love. If I can get Dale Earnhardt to do something for me, great, right? If you can get Connor to do something for you, great. But like the reality is that we have seen this time and time again where, for example, we were doing a campaign with somebody, and they were trying to engage folks that really like Deadmau5. And the reality is, if you went to Deadmau5 and tried to get him to engage organically, it was pretty impossible. But so many of his fans started engaging in the content that were being published by one of our clients that they started tagging Deadmau5 into it, and then he did come in and he did start syndicating it, but it was because of a true organic, earned approach. And then all the way down to, if you think about, these citizen influencers and so forth that, have their specific place, because the reality is that if I really was going to, join in on a particular conversation or be attached to something, I would probably personally, depending upon the brand, would not really care what the hyper influencer said, right? I don't think I would care what Dale Earnhardt said about, baby clothes or something of that nature, right? But a citizen influencer like other moms would probably care what other moms are saying about a particular brand as it comes to their own subject. So I was just curious, like when you guys broke these down, did you have different tiers and reacted differently to each of them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, UFC is very fortunate that they have all those different levels of fandom, basically, and from the Dales and the Demi Lovatos all the way down to your citizen influencers, and we definitely would engage with them all differently, and activate with them on a different manner. So when you have Dale Earnhardt or a Demi Lovato, and they're coming out to a live event, they're sitting front row, a citizen influencer, we might invite them out, to join us if they happen to be in the same city that we're at. We're going to hook them up with front row seats to a weigh-in, or a couple of times, random times, fans would be tweeting about something and they would know that we were at a certain location or with a specific athlete, and I might have some signed merchandise that I just did some surprise and delight stuff with. Having them show up to an event where we were at, if it was a meet and greet, or hooking them up with a free 30-day subscription to UC Fight Pass, we were able to create content and engagement opportunities with all those different buckets, all in different ways.
Totally. And I think, one of the things is there's internal ones, which I think you mentioned, even the cooking and so forth. And then there's external ones. And what did you guys look beyond in terms of who was already talking about you? Did you look at like who was engaging in similar sports, or similar fan bases? Like, from an external perspective, how did you approach getting those new ones?
So I had actually spent probably 4 or 5 months on a research project. When I took over social for the UFC, I didn't feel like we had a good understanding of who our audience was, and especially didn't put them in any different type of buckets. So when I started just kind of researching, I wanted to understand exactly who was following the UFC. So I found a tool that was able to give me a breakdown of our followers based on their highest number of followers and other verified accounts. And this was before Twitter had launched the feature for verified accounts to be able to see other verified followers. And so I went through that process, and I had a group of people that I identified. And then I took that another step further, and I started doing research, doing like a Boolean search of trying to identify different search terms, keywords, athlete names. Because a lot of times when these people are talking about us on social media, they're not always tagging us in the content. They're not tagging or using the proper hashtag. But I would notice that they said Ronda Rousey, and they probably spelled Ronda Rousey's name incorrectly with an H instead of just Ronda. So I started doing all this research and identifying that there was even a bigger pool of people, and maybe they weren't following us yet. So I started using all of that information that I was collecting and started to reach out to the influencers, and actually ended up experiencing that a lot of times these people were more excited that the UFC was tweeting to them, and we're geeking out on the back end because we're like, oh crap, Demi Lovato just responded to us. Bellator just told us what a big fan she is, and now she's told me what fighter she's a fan of. And now I was able to start kind of compartmentalizing different influencers, and then figuring out exactly if they were just a casual fan, a Fringe fan, or if they were a fan of a specific athlete, and then start making those connections.
Totally, yeah. We got a few screen grabs of some of your fun times here. I don't think anybody would say that you would have had a job that they wouldn't have at least been a little jealous of. So I do think you're working very hard, but this seems like an awful lot of fun. And speaking of,
it was a whole lot of sleepless nights.
Well, speaking of fun, one of our influencers on here, which looks like a citizen influencer, does have a particularly interesting @handle name. I don't think I've quite interacted with Purple Titty before, but it's certainly somebody out there. And I was wondering if you'd tell us a little bit about this one, because I thought this was pretty fun.
It's sometimes people, when I have to put screenshots of stuff in here, I'm like, these names are interesting. But it's fun. When we had Jenna Marbles had come up to the event, this weekend actually happened to be a time that Ronda Rousey had defeated Kat Zingano in 13 seconds. So there was a lot of conversation that was coming up around that event. And it was just, this was another place where, as I started to spend time putting people in understanding who all was engaged with us, when moments like this that would happen, I went into straight listening mode and start flagging, additional influencers and citizen influencers, and start flagging them so that I knew, okay, these are the group of influencers to start conversating around Ronda Rousey's next fight. That might not be 3 to 4 months from now, but at least I'm starting to put people into these different buckets of saying these are the Ronda fans, these are the Conor fans, because again, even though they're influencers, they might not be interested in all the fighters. They might have just a handful of fighters that they were interested in.
Totally. I think the approach that you guys have done is obviously keep everything, extremely engaging, responsive when needed. But one of the best words that I can think of is authentic, right? And you talked about that in the B-roll footage. You talked about that in a lot of other areas. And I think whether it's right or wrong, we even saw that in the presidential election recently, right? That whether it's right or wrong, it's really clear that Trump is tweeting himself, and whatever he says is exactly what he says, and it's not filtered, right? And so there's no need for good or bad. There was no need for him to say sign off as himself or anything of that nature. Everybody always knew that. Whereas in contrast, whether it was right or wrong, in Hillary's discussions or tweets, it was very rare that maybe she would sign it against her name, but otherwise it was largely, promotional that was done by her staff. Totally, right? Yeah. And we've talked about that, and a lot of people have, think about it. Nobody saw it coming. None of the polling data, none of the stuff that we spent millions and millions of dollars on. But one of the things is that we all know that whether you feel he won the popular vote or whatever it might be, he wasn't very off from that. But people appreciated authenticity, whether they liked it or not, right? So when you think about authenticity, how would you rank that? And then how did UFC really use that, going forward? And was that a tenet of the brand?
Yeah, definitely. Authenticity is huge, and it's even something that I would educate the athletes about. There were a couple of athletes that I had worked with because it was very obvious when it wasn't them tweeting, and it could have been something as speaking about themselves in the third person, and it's like, well, it's your account, so even if you are having somebody ghost tweet for you, put the copy in context so at least it feels like it's coming from you. Especially when they're doing things with working with sponsors and things like that. A lot of times sponsors are going to give the athletes the copy that they want the athlete to say, and I would always work with them to massage it so it feels more authentic to them. So you don't feel like you're being sold something, but you feel like, okay, I'm hearing this person out because it's something that they actually use or do on a daily basis. And one of the things, like with Demi Lovato, for example, the relationship that we had with her, we had actually found that Demi was a fan because of her mom. Her mom was tweeting about it, and then I started putting the dots together. I found her mom, then her sister, and then I backed it into Demi, and we started this relationship with Demi over Twitter that we had been inviting her to a show, and she was on tour and she couldn't make it, and then she finally came out to an event. Came out one night, had so much fun. She ended up coming out the second night. There happened to be 2 fights in 2 days that particular weekend. And then what we were able to do is we were able to really kind of leverage the relationship, and it was we were able to reciprocate, things that she had going on in her life. So, we happened to have a Ronda Rousey event where we were able to tap back into Demi and have her be a part of a documentary that we had done around Ronda Rousey's event, and so she gave like a 3 to 5 minute little piece in here, and then when we have her out at an event, she knows my team, she knows we're coming, and she's been on our Snapchat, she's been on our Twitter account, things like that. So it's been really, really cool. And then seeing her fans that get engaged with it, because when the events come around, they start looking for her on TV. And they're taking screenshots of their television, like, oh, I just saw Demi sitting front row next to Nick Jonas or something, So it's really cool to kind of see how her audience then gets involved in wanting to know what she's doing and where she's at and who she's a fan of and who she's going for. It was really cool.
Yeah, it's because you're talking a lot about some incredible names, and you're obviously talking about some that through traditional means you may actually have to pay. And one of the things that we're finding is that the average consumer, particularly with as much information as they are faced with dauntingly each and every day, they're really hip to stuff either being true and authentic or being promoted and just through a different means. And even like even the FCC and so forth is also catching on to this, and they're talking, with respect to Truth in Advertising Act and so forth. So, that paid versus earned influence, sounds like in many cases this is earned, and maybe you guys did some sponsorship stuff with them afterwards. But how did you split that budget when you thought about influencer marketing? Was a lot of it promotional, or was not a lot of it earned, and then you added paid?
A lot of it was, a lot of it was more on the earned side and working with these people. So again, with Demi as an example, as we started to expand on this relationship with her, I don't want to necessarily say that she wrote this song about Ronda Rousey because of what we did, but I'd like to believe that there was some influence there. She had her Confident album, and there was she was doing her listening party, and she had a live Twitter session going at the same time, and so we were actually able to at the UFC, we were paying attention as the album was coming out, and she was releasing song by song. And one of her songs, she mentions, knock 'em out like Ronda Rousey, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, like, had we not invested a year into this relationship with her, would she have felt that same way about Ronda Rousey? You know what I mean? Like, you start to ask that question. Well, now if you pay attention to Demi Lovato's any of her social feeds, especially her Snapchat right now, she's actually training in jiu-jitsu. So she's working out, with Jake Glazer at his gym in LA, and she's actually she looks pretty good. She looks really, really good. So again, seeing that her fans her fans can see that she's taking the sport very seriously, that she's actually doing this, whether it be for fun or for exercise, like she's taking it very seriously. So when she is talking about UFC, it is very authentic.
Yeah. Just as an FYI, I talk about UFC a lot too, but I have not been offered front row seats to anything. I just want to make mention of that. If there are some strings you want to pull, feel free to let me know. I'll be happy to be a great influencer behind the stage. But this has been a great discussion, and I think we've actually got several folks that have some questions. And one of them was a question around how many people manage each of the different platforms that you obviously had your fingers into with respect to all those different ones. Was it a specialist? Was it somebody overall? And how big was that team? And were they divided up, or was it kind of a more general team that oversaw all?
A lot of times when I tell people the size of the team, they're just like, "Are you serious?" So there were 4 people based at headquarters in Las Vegas that oversaw all platforms. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I mean, you're talking also monitoring 600 plus athletes. Plus we had like one person in a couple of different regions. So we had somebody in UK, somebody for Latin America, somebody for Brazil, and Canada. And Canada oversaw Australia and Asia. So we had one person in each of those markets that were really creating content localized to their region. But it was the 4 people at corporate headquarters that were really kind of overseeing all social accounts, all platforms, covering the live events, producing the content that went out on a daily basis, the customer service from it, working with the athletes, the verifications, I got locked out, what do I do? My account got hacked, what do I do? So we covered everything.
Yeah, so that means like you're talking about even like responding to customer service issues and stuff.
Yeah.
You guys would handle all of it. Well, that's an interesting point that you bring up. And, when you think about 2017, do you feel like influencer marketing is going to be more of like this holistic thing where you're attracting influencers because of your product and even your customer service and response time, as well as activating and finding them? How do you think about influencer marketing in 2017, and how do you feel it's going to come together? And will it be a part of everything, or will it kind of stay in a silo?
No, I personally, I think that it's a holistic approach, really. I mean, I can say this from a personal experience this weekend, or last weekend, excuse me. I know that Delta has me flagged as an influencer, and I had some trouble on a Delta flight this weekend, and, granted, I wasn't able to catch my flight to get home to Las Vegas, but the way that they were handling things, the private messages that I received from them, and the things that they were doing for me on the back end, I was able to share that with my social following and say, you know what, I didn't catch my flight, but Delta was a rock star on customer service. They really, was able to help me get X, Y, and Z taken care of. And I know that a lot of other brands are really starting to pay attention to that kind of stuff, and finding tools on the back end to really manage that customer relationship, to know your medallion status, or if you're a frequent flyer, if you're a frequent Starbucks gold member, things like that. And people are companies are getting really, really smart about that, and they should, because you're identifying your influential customers, and that can make or break some business sometimes. If you had a terrible experience, at a coffee shop or at a salon and things like that, the influence that I have within my network, I could really, defer the business to go somewhere else and say, you know what, this place was awful, but this is where I went and it was awesome, and I could take, 20 of, I could take 20 people with me, or whatever the number is.
Well, I think the best description is, customer service is now a spectator sport, right? Just as much as we all, watch what happens at an airline counter when somebody is speaking to a customer, we're now watching what happens, and we're watching also what doesn't happen, right? Like no brand is ever going to be rude. Delta's not going to tweet back and be like, "Hey, Shonda, don't care. Good luck," right? They're never going to do that. But they will, we will see, like, well, they took 20 minutes, or they took 30 minutes, or no, they responded in 2 minutes. So I think you're right. It's going to be more holistic, and we're going to consider it as part of each thing that we do. And, when you think about that, do you have a particular up-and-comer that you think is really going to make waves in 2017 with the Snap IPO coming up? Do you think something's going to break out of a shell or blast ahead of others? Or do you think it's going to, everybody's going to kind of keep their rankings, but maybe morph into something else? What do you think about all the platforms?
Snapchat obviously has been making some waves here in their spectacle, glasses that they launched just a couple weeks ago. It's really fun to kind of see people, going crazy trying to figure out where the spectacle vending machine is going to be. It was in the Grand Canyon yesterday. I thought about going. It was only a couple hours away from me. But it's interesting to see how each of the platforms are continuing to evolve. I think, Twitter is definitely trying to find the space. They had Periscope as their live broadcast. Now Facebook is competing with that with Facebook Live. Now you've got a lot of the VR and augmented reality stuff coming through, and just kind of interested to see how each of the platforms are going to embrace that, because that's going to be the next, that's the next big wave of things to come. So I'm excited for all things, evolving, and it challenges us, from a brand side or an agency side or what have you, to not get too comfortable in the type of content that you're thinking about for your brand. I mean, it challenges you to continue to evolve, because, what worked for us last year this time definitely isn't working. Sometimes even on a daily basis, the way that these algorithms change, you have to stay on top of all that stuff.
Totally. And, I'll end on this one and want to dive deep into your opinion. Is it important to have both a paid and earned strategy from an influence perspective, or is it important to maybe kick off with paid if you don't have the audience and then turn that into earned? And how would you kind of recommend that for people that either have, incredible brands like a UFC, or people that, have ones that maybe are just getting going?
Sure. I think a combination of the two is a great strategy. Anything that you can do when you're setting up your website, if you're selling product and getting tracking pixels into your shopping cart so that you can start to create an audience that's most likely to convert, and then do a lookalike audience against that. And then from an organic perspective, it's really understanding, first of all, your voice and your tone, like understanding who you are on social, whether you have a personality or not. A lot of times people forget to let social be social. They use it as a platform to sell. I don't necessarily sign up for social thinking, I hope somebody sells me something today. That's not what I'm going to social media for. But finding a way to create content and have a voice, have a tone, listen for opportunities. Again, that's another one that seems like a simple thing that people forget to do. Do a quick search. If you're if you're in the fitness space, this was something that I did for UFC Fit when we launched that product. Was I was listening for people that were talking about should they buy P90X or Insanity. So I started jumping into that conversation from the UFC Fit account and just said, hey, we've got UFC Fit just launched. Give us a try. We've got a 90-day money-back guarantee. And I started getting people that were responding to me with screenshots of their order confirmation because P90X and Insanity didn't reply when they were asking which of those two platforms they should choose. UFC Fit jumped into it. And so, put your listening mode on and then from there, again, you can start identifying, certain keywords or what people are talking about so that you can create your page strategy against that.
Oh, that's great. That's super helpful. And, I wanted to definitely thank you for the time that you spent with us today. I think, with the opportunities that your brand has had and of course, obviously all the engagement that it's created, I feel like maybe you've even forgotten more than some of us have even learned with respect to social and driving ROI. So again, thank you very much. I'll end with Hillary doing a quick announcement, but we really appreciate you being part of this.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for attending the webinar. We'll be continuing the Age of Influence series with a webinar on Monday, the 28th at 2 p.m. with Devin, talking more about earned versus paid. All right, and we'll also be following up with this webinar in an email. So if you have coworkers that didn't get a chance to attend, you'll be able to get the recording and forward it on to them. All right, well, thank you so much, and everybody have a nice day.